Okay, please welcome Robert Blaschke.
Good afternoon. Thank you for attending my lecture on holographic transits. Did we get this remote mouse working or not?
Yeah.
Looks like you're all happy. Oh, it is working now. If you put the Command R on the laptop there, Command R will take it back to screensaver mode. There we are. Thank you. This conference is being held during an important moment in the direction and evolution of the profession of astrology. As you can see today, we have a triple conjunction of Uranus in the North Node joined by Mercury, all in the 17th degree of Pisces. These conjunctions of Uranus in the North Node occur every 15 to 15 and a half years, and at these times they seek the future of astrology in some important way. I'm going to share my interpretation of this present conjunction of Uranus in the North Node with you, and we'll go back and look at the last two conjunctions of Uranus with the North Node in Capricorn in December of 1991 and the Uranus North Node conjunction in Scorpio in 1976. So these conjunctions are occurring about every 15 to 15 and a half years. Uranus, as you know, has an 84-year orbital cycle. The nodal cycle is about 18 and a half years going retrograde through the zodiac, and they align and form a conjunction every 15 to 15 and a half years. If another planet is forming an exact aspect to the Uranus North Node conjunction, by conjunction, by trine, major colonnadic aspect, it is part of the meaning of the Uranus conjunction with the North Node. This conference was organized to showcase the younger generation of astrologers, to have them come and present lectures on their material, and to show their knowledge and their talent and their skills. But more importantly, with this Uranus North Node conjunction conjoined by the planet of youth, which is Mercury, in the sign of synthetic thinking, which is Pisces, what we're seeing now is for the next 15 years, the young astrologers that are part of the faculty of this Blast Conference are going to make their contribution and step into positions of leadership within the astrological community. The generation of souls that was born with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Leo from 1946 to 1948, they are now reaching their second Saturn returns, and I feel that the Blast Conference is a passing of the baton of leadership to the younger generation of astrologers. And this former generation, which has psychologized the language of astrology, they have merged it with Jungian archetypal psychology and Eastern mystical teachings. Their 30 years of relevance is coming to a close now, and the baton is being passed to the younger generation of astrologers. This conjunction of Uranus on the North Node, seeding the future of astrology for the next 15 and a half years, conjoined by the planet of youth, Mercury, in the sign of synthetic thinking, Pisces, shows us how these young astrologers, these 20-something and 30-something astrologers, and there's a few that are over 40, but they can join the club too. I would say anybody younger than their Saturn opposition at age 44 can claim entrance into the so-called young club. Old guys like me now, the graybeards, I'm only 53, but compared to these 22-year-old guys like Chris Brennan, I could be his dad. I have a daughter that's actually 26. So I think that this is really a beautiful symbolism for the youth, symbolized by Mercury, seeding the future of astrology with Uranus conjunct the North Node in the sign that represents synthetic thinking. Virgo rules analytical thinking, Pisces rules intellectual synthesis. And these young astrologers are bringing their understanding of modern Western techniques, their enmeshment or immersion into the tradition, the heritage traditions such as Hellenistic astrology, and their study of Vedic astrology. And they're coming up with very unique and original synthesized thinking using these different systems of astrology. So I think they're going to be prominent in the profession of astrology for the next 15 years and also for the next 30 years. Every time Saturn transits through Leo, we actually see a change of leadership within the world of astrology. And at the last time that Saturn was in Leo, 1976 and 77, we had a lot of those baby boom astrologers with the Pluto conjunct Saturn and Leo born from 1946 to 1948 that stepped into prominence. At this time now, we're seeing the torch and the baton of leadership passed over to the younger astrologers. I'd also like to share with you the last conjunction that we had of Uranus in the North Node. And if we can switch over to the Adobe program, And, whoops, I think the wrong one here. Down at the bottom, Jeff, horizontally, there's a icon there for the Adobe program somewhere. A little bit lower. Should be over on the right side, about 5 from the right. Yes, thank you. And if you go into the Windows menu now, and please select the chart that says 1991 on it, click on the background. We lost the header bar there.
Yeah.
And no, not there, not there. Click on the main. Oh no. Let me come on. Let me do it. I couldn't get the remote mouse to work, so excuse me while I step down here and get this set up again. I'd like to show you the chart of the last Uranus North Node conjunction, and this was from November 12th of 1991. As you can see, the North Node was conjunct Uranus in Capricorn and also conjoined by Neptune. So this is 15 to 15 and a half years ago, the last time that we had the seeding of the future of astrology with Uranus conjoined to the North Node. And at this time, Robert Schmidt got into a conversation with Michael Erlewine at an NCGR conference and said that he wanted to do a translation from the Greek of Ptolemy's Tetrabiblios. Shortly after this, Robert Hahn and Robert Zoller got involved and formed Arahat, which was the Association for the Retrieval of Ancient Historical Texts. And for the last 15 years, this has been the primary progressive device in astrology to go back and to translate the Arabic, the Latin, and the Greek text from our tradition, from our heritage tradition. And you can see that the Uranus on the North Node was in the sign of Capricorn, which rules antiquity and the study of one's lineage. And it was also joined by Neptune, where these heritage tradition techniques have become idealized in these last 15 years. If we go back before that, Mary, if you can go up into the Windows menu and select the chart that says 1976 there, 976, the third one down, they're all in order. This is the last previous Uranus North Node conjunction from September of 1976. And you can see Uranus and the North Node were conjunct in the 5th degree of Scorpio. And there was also a stellium of Mercury, Venus, and Mars and Pluto, all within 3 degrees of Libra. This was the exact month that I started my career as a chart interpreting astrologer. This conjunction was all over my natal chart like a cheap suit. My Venus is actually 4 degrees of Scorpio, and we had this Uranus on the node exactly conjunct my natal Venus. I have Mars at 8 degrees of Libra, and I was having a Mars return. And at the time, in 1976, I was hitchhiking across the country and across Canada with a table of houses and ephemeris in my backpack. And this was literally the month that I started doing charts, right with this Uranus on the North Node. The other significant things that happened in September of 1976, and again, Uranus conjunct the North Node is the seeding of the future of astrology. These were the depth psychology books when you think of Scorpio. Liz Green and Stephen Arroyo, who were born in 1946, 1 month apart in August and September, they published their first books at their first Saturn return at the age of 29. So in 75 and 76, you had Astrology, Psychology, and the Four Elements get published. You had Saturn, A New Look at the Night Devil get published. You had the Martin Schulman books, the Karmic Astrology series of the lunar nodes and reincarnation and the retrograde planets. You had Robert Hahn's book come out on planets in transit, Lois Ron's book on modern transits. We had this fabulous, I guess what you would say, addition to the astrological literature of some of these incredibly deep books that came out through the Uranus transit through Scorpio from 1975 to 1981. So this was an important point historically in the development of astrology to have Uranus conjunct the North Node in the sign of depth psychology of Scorpio. And that was the defining ethos of astrology until the Uranus North Node conjunction in Capricorn at the start of Arahat and Project Hindsight. So we can go back to that Star Sprite program. If you can find that in the bottom there, you'll see a program called Star Sprite. And if you select the Command R, it'll put it up on the screen as a screensaver. And so here we are today with Uranus at almost the exact midpoint of Mercury in the North Node, this triple conjunction. And so I believe that the future of astrology now is really going to be seeded for the future by the young astrologers that are presenting here at this conference. And this is going to be in effect now for the next 15 and a half years. if you can go to the Adobe program now, the main handout. And up in the, if you click on the lower field, and then it'll bring the toolbar across the top, there you go. And up in the windows, we can now go to the Holographic Transits. The top of the file there. Yes, thank you. Today's presentation is on my new book, Volume 5, Holographic Transits, which I wrote last year, was just published in December. And it's introducing a complementary technique to use alongside of your basic transit technique. And if you ask, Robert, what is a holographic transit? Essentially, it's the planet's relationship to the sun. And there are 3 dimensions to the new book. One is where we look at the phase angle between the sun and the planets in the natal chart, and we measure that exact distance arc between the sun and the moon and the sun and each of the other 8 planets. And then we actually calculate the distance arc for that phase angle between the sun and the planet, and we convert that distance arc into a degree symbol, and that helps us to understand the holographic nature of the soul. We also go back and look at the prenatal synodic cycle conjunction that occurred prior to birth. And we're all part of collective soul groups, and we all have 9 different soul groups that we belong to. The Sun Moon, the Sun Mercury, the Sun Venus, all the way out to Sun Pluto. And the way that we can identify our soul group is to calculate the conjunction of any planet with the Sun prior to our birth. And the degree symbol for that conjunction describes the collective nature of our soul group. And when you cast that prenatal synodic cycle conjunction for your place of birth, the local rising degree shows your individual contribution to that collective soul group. I'd like to show you an example of how this works. If, Mary, you go up to the windows and select the Moses chart there, prenatal Sun-Jupiter. This is the Sun-Jupiter conjunction in March of 1975, which is a few months before Moses Sirigard, the organizer of this Blast Conference, was born. And you can see that it's a powerful one. It landed right on the Aries point. And these cycles last for 13 months. From one Sun-Jupiter conjunction to the next is slightly over a year. It's 13 months. And this is the definition of a synodic cycle. It is the length of time between a planet conjoining the sun until its next conjunction with the sun. And this is different than a sidereal cycle, which is where you measure a planet from 0 Aries to 0 Aries. In the synodic cycle that we use in the holographic transits, we're measuring the planet's conjunction with the sun and then the phase angles that occur during the length of that cycle. So I've calculated this prenatal Sun-Jupiter conjunction for Moses for Elizabeth, New Jersey, the place of his birth. And you'll notice that the 2nd degree of Scorpio is rising, and the planet Uranus, ruling the career astrologer, is conjunct his ascendant within 5 minutes of arc. It was written in the stars. Moses was born to be a career astrologer. He started practicing professionally at the age of 19 at the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia. He's 31 now, so he actually has a whole Jupiter cycle of professional experience, and he's only 31. So this is one way to understand Moses' individual contribution to his collective soul group, is that the Sun-Jupiter conjunction's degree, the 1st degree of Aries, and its symbolism, that represents the collective purpose of his soul group. And when you cast these prenatal conjunctions for the place of birth, and in the case of Moses, this was Elizabeth, New Jersey, you'll find that the local rising degree is, and its symbolism is how you can make your individual expression or individual contribution to your collective soul group. And it's quite remarkable that Moses has Uranus conjunct the ascendant within 5 minutes of arc when you calculate that prenatal Sun-Jupiter conjunction for his place of birth. There is another file, Mary, up here that's called the 1971 Quintet, if you can take a look at that. There are also 5 astrologers that are on the faculty of this conference that are near and dear to my heart. They're all born in 1971, the year that I started studying astrology, and the year that I got out of high school. If you could go back to the view menu and please just put that fit in window. Fit in window, yes, and that'll show the entire page. Thank you. During 1971, we had Kelly Lee Phipps born in February. We had Jonathan Pearl and Eric Myers born within a day of each other in late June of 1971. Bill Street was born in October of that year, and Maurice Fernandez was born in November of 1971. What they all share in common is that they all were part of the same Sun-Jupiter synodic cycle that occurred in November of 1970 and lasted 13 months until December of 1971. So these 5 astrologers that are all born within months of each other with the same Sun-Jupiter prenatal synodic cycle conjunction are all part of a particular soul group that has come to educate us and to teach us astrology and to advance the profession through their writing and their lecturing and their teaching. One of the aspects that they all share is the Saturn-Neptune opposition that was forming in the heavens 36 years ago in 1971. And you'll notice that by the time of their births, Jupiter had moved into a conjunction with Neptune in Sagittarius, or split between late Scorpio and early Sagittarius, and being opposed by Saturn in Gemini. And so all of them now are having a holographic transit of Saturn and Neptune repeating the same phase angle that they had in their natal charts. So when I talk about a holographic transit, there's two other terms that astrologers use to describe these. They can be referred to as a phase angle return, and they also could be called a recurrence transit. And what this means is that any pair of planets in the natal chart and their exact angular separation, that phase angle will recur in the heavens on a repeating basis throughout life. Now, you know that the Saturn-Neptune cycle lasts 35 years, and so these guys are only going to get two of these. You'll have to be probably around 70 or 71 when you get your next one, and you have to live to be over 100 to get the third one. So for these five guys, we feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm not quite old enough to be their father, but I guess I could be their uncle. They all are very important to me because they were born the year that I started studying astrology in 1971, and the year that I got out of high school and started hitchhiking across the U.S. and Canada. One of the things that is quite striking is that Mars was at 20 degrees of Aquarius in the charts of Jonathan Pearl and Eric Myers, born one day apart. And then Mars went retrograde in Aquarius in 1971 between July the 10th and September the 9th. And by the time Bill Street was born in October, Mars was back at 20 degrees of Aquarius. So three of these guys, Jonathan Pearl, Eric Myers, and Bill Street, all have their Mars in the 21st degree of Aquarius, which is quite remarkable. And Maurice, I think, has the Mars at the end of Aquarius, if I remember correctly. It was in the 30th degree. And Kelly, with his Saturn in Taurus, the oldest of the bunch, he was born in February, his Saturn is square to that Sun-Jupiter conjunction degree in 16 Scorpio. And he's the one that kind of launched that whole wave of astrologers that were born in 1971.
And Robert, the transiting Neptune is, of course, at 21 Aquarius.
Right now, as we speak, and opposed by Saturn. So there's a lot of stuff that is being touched off in these five astrologers' horoscopes. I want to congratulate them. They've all had their third Jupiter returns within the last year or so. If you notice, their Jupiters are anywhere from late Scorpio into Sagittarius. And age 35 is the year that I became a full-time self-employed professional astrologer. And I believe that all of their careers are growing and expanding now. And between now and age 47, when they get to their fourth Jupiter returns, they have nothing but success. And I hope many more books come out of them here in the next 12 years.
Everyone here has a doctor, any kind of medical background, or some kind of low blood sugar issue outside, or you can help us? Thank you.
If we go back up to the window mirror, if we go back up to the window file, and if we can bring the holographic, or actually that Saturn-Neptune phase angle returns, we can just show that chart right there. This is a holographic transit, or phase angle return, or recurrence transit for Eric Myers. And this is when the Saturn-Neptune opposition was precisely in the same number of degrees, minutes, and seconds of arc last September. And he's also getting a second one. When you get three Saturn-Neptune oppositions, two of them will match the natal chart's angular separation. One will be on the other side of it. When we calculate these holographic transits, we're also factoring in whether the planet rises ahead of the Sun in the case of the Sun-planet phase angle returns, whether it is an occidental or an oriental planet. And I'll explain this to you in a few minutes, how you have to be careful when you calculate these phase angle returns, because you want to make sure that you get the waxing-waning orientation or the planet rising ahead of the Sun or setting after the Sun. You have to factor that into your calculations. But what is interesting in these charts, these holographic transit charts, is that they often have exact synastry with your own nativity, with your own secondary progressed horoscope, and with the charts of the important peoples in your lives. And you notice that last September, when Eric was writing his second book, right at the moment that Saturn and Neptune perfected their distance arc to the degrees, minutes, and seconds of arc that matched his natal chart, we have the moon in 15 degrees of Sagittarius, and that is his natal midheaven. So you'll find that these charts are highly accurate in the synastry connections that they make with your own birth chart, with your current secondary progressions, and with the horoscopes of the people that are closest to you. If we could go back to the first one now, the holographic transits one, and then if we could go up to the view menu and then select fit in window. Thank you. This is what you have on the first page of your handouts in the binder, is this particular page that you're seeing up here on the screen. And I'd like to describe to you what exactly is holographic astrology. What are holographic transits? Very simply put, holographic astrology is an evolving branch of consciousness that's taking us from the fourth dimension of awareness of time cycles into the fifth dimension awareness of spatial cycles. In holographic astrology, the sun is preeminent as the central star of our solar system, which provides the very physical survival of the planets. Without the sun, the central star of our solar system, the planets would have no light, they would have no heat, they would have no gravity, and they would have no electromagnetism. And any theory or technique in astrology that does not acknowledge the preeminence and the primacy of the sun has to be called into question. And what I'm trying to do with this holographic transits technique and holographic astrology in general is to show that the underpinning of transit technique is seen through the sun and the degrees of the zodiac. That the zodiac is the primary spiritual force in astrology, and it's created by the apparent path of the sun around the ecliptic. And any time that you talk to a long-standing professional astrologer who's been doing consultation work with clients for the last 15, 20, 30 years, the one thing that they always say is that when the clients come in for a transit interpretation, they ask two questions. They say, what's going to happen to me, and when's it going to be over? And this is regardless of how you language your interpretation of their transits. You can put a positive psychological spin on the transit interpretation. You can put a positive spiritual personal growth spin on the interpretation of the transits. But it stands to reason that because the transits have an implied fatalism in them, they are the time cycles, the fourth dimension, that are administering fate after a person is born. The client always feels somewhat intimidated by a discussion of the transits. And if professional astrologers are getting around and having a beer, having dinner together after these lectures at a conference, and you start telling the truth to each other about what the clients say during the consultation session, many times you hear that the two questions the clients ask is, how long is this going to last, and what's going to happen to me? So what I've done is I've introduced a complementary technique called holographic transits, where if, for example, you have the transit of Pluto conjunct your sun at 28 degrees of Sagittarius, or opposite your sun at 28 degrees of Gemini, right now you would have the station of Pluto, which was yesterday, in 28 Sagittarius, holding a long stationary conjunction or opposition to a sun at 28 of Mutable, and this would be in effect for 5 to 6 months. This is very difficult for a client to go through. We know that with transits of Neptune and Pluto, you can sometimes get 5 exact aspects being formed. They start with a station with 2 exact aspects that is in effect for 4 to 6 months. Then there's a middle transit, and then there's another station in the following year that has the 4th and 5th exact aspect. By the time somebody gets done with Neptune or Pluto forming exact conjunction, square, or opposition with their sun, moon, or any other important planet in their chart, it's spread out over 22 months, and it could involve as many as 5 exact aspects. People are going to ask you, as a consulting astrologer, what's going to happen to me during this period? And I feel like there's all these fated circumstances coming at me in my life. How do I make decisions and choices while I'm going through this very difficult time? What I'm recommending in the new book is to use the holographic transit, the phase angle return of Pluto and the Sun, which happens once a year. And at that point is when the soul and the free will that's contained in the higher self can align with the divine energy that comes through the light of the sun. And that's when a person can see the essence of that Pluto transit and make the choices and make the decisions that they need to make. You all know that, for example, under the influence of a Pluto transit, things will come to an end. There will be chapters of life that come to a close. There are things that have to be eliminated from your life, or things that you have to let go of or surrender to, things that are beyond your control. And yet you also have to make choices during that time period. Everybody has their sun and Pluto, for example, at a specific distance arc or phase angle in the natal chart. And we can calculate once a year when these phase angles return, and it's at this time that a person can work with those Pluto-Sun energies and I align the free will with the higher self. The gist behind this is that the sun rules the heart center. And it's my personal opinion as a consulting astrologer that it's not possible to integrate the energies of the planets into the higher self unless they go through the heart center. And this is why clients ask during a transit interpretation, what's going to happen to me and when is it over? Is because they're not dealing with an integrated process. They're dealing with just trying to hold on until something goes away. But there is a way to work with the sun and its relationship with all of the other planets where these planetary energies can come through the heart center and be integrated into the higher self. And this is when you look at the phase angles between the sun and the planets in the birth chart. One way to understand the holographic dimension of the birth chart is that when you're born, your soul is fragmented into 9 holograms. And in Volume 5, I describe these as the hologram of instinct, thought, and attachment. These are the Sun, Moon, Sun, Mercury, and Sun, Venus phase angles in your chart. And this is the consciousness that's operating on the personal level. Then when you look at what's operating on a social level, you have the phase angles of passion, judgment, and responsibility that can be seen through the Sun, Mars, the Sun, Jupiter, and the Sun, Saturn phase angles. These are your primary vocational indicators, how you step out into the society and the culture in which you live and make your contribution as an individual. We also know that life operates on a transpersonal level, and we have 3 other holograms that the soul is fragmented into at the time of birth that are the holograms of enlightenment, renunciation, and transformation. And these we can understand through the Sun Uranus, Sun Neptune, and Sun Pluto phase angles in the birth chart. When we want to understand what is the soul group that we belong to, we look at the prenatal new moon, the prenatal inferior conjunction of the Sun and Mercury, the prenatal inferior conjunction of the Sun and Venus, and the prenatal conjunction of the Sun and Mars, Sun and Jupiter, and all the rest of the superior planets. When you calculate these prenatal synodic cycle conjunctions, the symbolism for the degree of the conjunction defines the collective purpose of the soul group of which you are a part. And when you cast those prenatal conjunctions for your place of birth, the rising degree, like we showed for Moses, where he had Uranus conjunct the ascendant in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and the symbolism for that rising degree, that defines your individual expression of the collective energies of your soul group. You might ask me, Robert, how do I look at a flat chart wheel and visualize it holographically without taking drugs? Now, those of you that maybe have some mescaline and a Macintosh computer, you can do this and you wouldn't have to change anything in the horoscope. But the rest of us that are sober and trying to get ready for the client coming in an hour and a half, there's one thing you do. In your tropical nativity, you add the glyph of the earth. Now, you can do this in solar fire. You can go up there into your chart options and your display points and you just click on the earth and it shows up. Unfortunately, in the IO edition program for the Macintosh and some of the other programs, the only way you can get the glyph of the earth into the chart wheel is to calculate a heliocentric zodiac nativity, and then the sun disappears and the earth is in there. So regardless of which software you have, whether or not you can do this, the thing to do is just to hand draw in the glyph of the earth, which is a circle with a cross in it, and it's always exactly opposite your natal sun by degree and minute and by house position. When you do this, you can then take the distance arc between the sun and the moon, as I'm showing you with this chart example, or between the sun and any other planet, and you can create what I call a holographic triangle. And you'll have a distance arc A between the sun and the moon. That's your phase angle. That's your natal phase angle of the sun and moon. And then you have a second distance arc between the earth and the moon. And one we call arc A and the other one we call arc B. Together, they add up to 180 degrees. Now, if you convert these arcs, and in my chart here that you're seeing, the distance arc between the sun and moon is between 103 and 104 degrees. In my second book on the Sabian aspect orbs, I introduced a radical new technique to interpret aspects by measuring the distance arc between 2 planets, converting that distance arc into a degree of the zodiac, and then referring to the Sabian symbol for that degree to describe the relationship between the 2 planets. I'm using that very same technique in Volume 5, and I'm also adding in a second distance arc between the Earth and the other planet. Now, when you convert these 2 arcs into their corresponding zodiac degrees, you're taking the slower of the 2 planets and placing it on the ascendant as if it was at 9 o'clock, and then you're measuring to the faster planet. So if you measure from the sun to the moon, and you have a distance arc of 103 to 104 degrees, that is going to correlate with the 14th degree of Cancer. because 103 to 104 degrees into the zodiac, starting at 0 Aries, will take you to 13 to 14 Cancer. So the Sabian symbol, or the cherubal, or the sidereal degree symbol for the 14th degree of Cancer is going to tell you about the holographic dimension of your soul. You also measure the distance arc between the Earth and the Moon, and in my case it's between 76 and 77 degrees, and we all know that Gemini starts at 60, and so this distance arc converts to the 17th degree of Gemini. So what is the relationship between the 14th degree of Cancer and the 17th degree of Gemini? They are each other's anticyon. They are each other's solstice point. And so when you work with this system, you're actually converting these holographic triangles of the Sun-Moon arc and the Earth-Moon arc into their corresponding degree symbols that match the days of the year when the Sun is at identical declination. 2 weeks before the summer solstice, the Sun is at a certain declination in the sign of Gemini. When it hits the maximum declination at the summer solstice and starts to come down and gets 2 weeks into Cancer, it's in the identical declination. And that's what solstice points, or as Jonathan Pearl was lecturing about the other day, what we call antitia. The other thing that we do in converting this birth chart into a holographic reality is we think of laser holography. In laser holography, you have a laser beam or a light beam that is aimed at a half-silvered mirror. And at that point, the stream of light is separated into two. One of the beams of light goes straight to a photographic plate. This is the reference beam. The other beam of light goes up to the object being photographed, and then from there it's directed onward to the photographic plate. When those two rays of light meet at the photographic plate, it creates the three-dimensional holographic image. This is what I think incarnation of the human body is. Our soul is being fragmented into 9 holograms at the moment of birth. And to restore ourselves to wholeness, we need the light of God, the divine rays of the sun, to come back to that exact angle at which the planets were when we were born in order to experience that restoration to wholeness. Those of you that have studied laser holography know that you can take this three-dimensional image that's created by the laser beams, you can cut it in half, you can cut it in quarters, you can cut it in eighths, you can cut it in sixteenths, and then you shine another light on it, and it gets restored to wholeness. Now this is a very spiritual approach to astrology, that you're making an acknowledgement or an admission that at the time of birth the soul is being fragmented holographically into these 9 holograms, and those are the moon and the 8 planets' relationship to the sun. And there's a certain time, once a month with the sun and moon, 3 times a year with the sun and Mercury, once every 2 years with the sun and Mars, where the divine rays of the sun are aiming on that planet in the sky the same way they were in your natal chart. And it's at those times that you can restore yourself to wholeness through this holographic perspective. This is a diagram of how laser holography functions. And this is the light beam hitting the half-silvered mirror, being directed up to the object and then onto the photographic plate. And there's a second stream of light that gets sent directly to the photographic plate. The sun is the laser. The object being photographed is the moon or one of the 8 planets. The photographic plate is the soul incarnating on Earth. And that's represented by the glyph of the Earth in the birth chart. And what is that half-silvered mirror? It's the zodiac. And the power of the degrees of the zodiac is that for the sun or for any of the planets to have any type of impact on the human experience, they have to pass through the divine energies of the zodiac degrees. When you think about it, what is a transit? As soon as that infant draws its first breath, the planets are moving. So what happens when Pluto comes around to the degree of your sun at 28 degrees of Sagittarius? The sun's not there anymore. But the imprint that the sun left in that degree of the zodiac at the time of your birth, that's where the seeds of karma are contained. So in this system, in transit technique, the sun and the zodiac degrees are thought to be the underpinning of how transit technique works. And if you factor in the second complementary technique using the holographic transit method, where you're taking the distance arc between the sun and moon or the sun and the other planets, and then calculating when those are recurring in the heavens on a repeating basis, you can know the certain times of the month and the certain times of the year when you are aligning your free will with higher self and are able to make choices for the good of the soul. If we could scroll down to the second page, please. On the second page of the handouts, there is a table that shows you how frequently these holographic transits occur. And you'll see that this is the synodic period of the planets in this second to last column from the right. And the Sun and Mercury have about a 116-day synodic cycle. So 3 times a year we know that Mercury goes retrograde from 20 to 24 days. And we'll also have 3 or sometimes 4 inferior conjunctions of Mercury with the Sun. Up in the window menu, there's a file called the Sun-Mercury phases. We can take a peek at that. When you're working with holographic transits, you are orienting yourself to the planet's relationship with the Sun. In standard transit technique, you're looking at the planetary cycles in and of themselves. You're looking at a transit of Saturn opposing itself at the age of 44, the transit of Saturn returning to its natal position at the age of 59 or 29, Jupiter coming into conjunction with the Sun and doing the same thing 12 years later. But you're not tracking the movement of the planet in relationship to the Sun. This is what a synodic cycle is. And if you choose to investigate this method and to use these holographic transits, you will become familiar with the cycles and phases of the planets, because you have to understand where in the Sun-planet relationship you were born, and then when that phase angle is recurring in the heavens. So in the book, there are diagrams that illustrate the orbital patterns of the 2 inferior planets, Mercury and Venus, and then also the orbital patterns of Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and the other 3 superior planets, the 3 outer planets. The reason why the synodic cycle of Mercury begins at the inferior conjunction is that when Mercury is retrograde and conjunct the Sun, it's closest to Earth, and it's at its most powerful. Then Mercury stations to go direct, and then it reaches its greatest elongation, and then it disappears into the rays of the Sun, and then it becomes conjunct the Sun in direct motion at the superior conjunction about 2 months after the inferior conjunction. And these are the most powerful points of the Sun and Mercury and the Sun and Venus, because you have a reversal of the electromagnetic polarity that occurs at the inferior conjunction of the Sun and Mercury. You are literally shifting from the Epimethean evening star to the Promethean morning star, where Mercury is rising ahead of the Sun. There's a switch that's made at the inferior conjunction. There's another reversal of electromagnetic polarity that takes place at the superior conjunction of direct motion Mercury with the Sun. And this is where you're phasing out of the Promethean morning star, where Mercury is rising ahead of the Sun, into the Epimethean half of the cycle, where Mercury is now the evening star and setting after the Sun. When you're born with a Promethean Mercury in a lower degree than the Sun and rising ahead of the Sun, you're given the gift of forethought. However, you're not given the gift of hindsight, so you keep entering into life experiences without reflecting on how the last ones turned out. If you're born with an evening star Mercury that's in a higher degree than the Sun, it rises after the Sun and sets after the Sun, you're given the gift of afterthought or hindsight. This is the person that sits down after the third heartache and says, maybe I better not date this type of woman anymore, or maybe I'll try something else. They're learning from their life experiences, learning from their mistakes. By secondary progression, you can have a shift from Promethean to Epimethean or vice versa when you get to a secondary progressed inferior conjunction or a secondary progressed superior conjunction. Those are profound sea changes in the life of any individual. And because this cycle lasts about 4 months, 116 days on average, and halfway through the cycle is when you get to the superior conjunction, these are going to last from 55 to 65 years. And so most of us at some point in our life are going to switch from Epimethean to Promethean if we live long enough, and we're going to have a change in consciousness, perceptual consciousness, when the Sun-Mercury either reach the progressed inferior conjunction or the progressed superior conjunction. When you work with the holographic transit technique, you are familiarizing yourself with these cycles and phases of the planets. There's another file there called the Sun-Saturn cycle, and this shows an orbital diagram of the superior planets. And here we see that when a superior planet, Mars through Pluto, is retrograde and opposite the Sun, that's where it's closest to Earth. No matter where you're born in the phase between the Sun and the superior planet, when it secondary progresses to its opposition, when that planet is retrograde and opposite the secondary progressed Sun, this is a progressed to progressed aspect now, not a progressed to natal aspect. But when you get, for example, progressed Saturn retrograde opposite the secondary progressed Sun, that is where the karmic point of the cycle peaks in its power and intensity. This is the most powerful point in any cycle, because that's where the planet is literally closest to Earth when it is retrograde and opposite the Sun. And this holds true for Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and the 3 outer planets, all of the superior planets. Yes, please.
Sorry to interrupt, but I wonder if you would go back to 2 frames before you were describing how to calculate arc A, arc B, and then you related that in your understanding of your experience that A and B are the opposite solstitial points to one another.
Once they're converted into degree symbols, they are. Yes. Would you like to see that picture again? Mayor, if we go back to that holographic transits one and then scroll up to the first page. He's asking about how we're converting these distance arcs between the sun and moon and the earth and moon into their corresponding degree symbols, and then those become the solstice points of each other.
Yeah, actually, my question over was the solstice points of each other. Have you found commonality in the A to B polarity, if you will?
Yes.
Between
The degree symbols have a relationship.
in other words, I guess what I meant, because I work with phase returns.
Yes.
Several of the, for all the inferior, I've not worked with the exterior, but the superior front.
Yes.
But I'm wondering about what your understanding is between what is one for the other than just saying that they're opposite.
This is the hologram of instinct, the sun-moon holographic triangle in all of our birth charts. It represents the ancestral bloodlines, the breeding and the training and discipline that we got or didn't get as children, and it represents the ancestral lineage that comes through the bloodlines of our mother and our father. It represents the holographic nature of the soul on a familial, ancestral, and instinctual nature. The 2 corresponding degree symbols are like light and shadow. One of them shows the higher nature of the individual, the holographic nature of the soul. The other one can show the shadow side. So when you study those 2 different degree symbols that are solstice points of each other, they're called mirror degrees in that taco shell zodiac that Jonathan Pearl was talking about, where you fold the chart wheel in half, and all the degrees down 180 side is all matching with an equivalent degree on the other side. I think that the relationship between those 2 arcs are showing the light and the shadow that are contained within the soul. I'll have to keep this a little brief because I have just a short period of time, and I'll be happy to answer some of those questions privately after the talk. If we can go back to the second page of that actual handout there, if we go back to the, yes, it just scrolled down to the second page of that. There is in the 3-ring binder that you got with the conference handouts, there is a summary of the length of the synodic cycles of the planets. And these are very different in length than the sidereal cycles of the planets. You know, for example, that Neptune takes 165 years to orbit around the sun. That is its sidereal period. But once a year, every 367.5 days, the sun and Neptune will form a conjunction and begin a new synodic cycle and end the previous one. So if you're thinking about how can a long-term Neptune or Pluto cycle have relevance in my life on a regular basis, when you're calculating the phase relationship of Neptune to the sun, Pluto to the sun, or Uranus to the sun, they're actually forming synodic cycle conjunctions once a year. In the case of Saturn, it's every 12.5 months there's a Sun-Saturn conjunction. In the case of Jupiter, like we looked at that chart for Moses, that prenatal Sun-Jupiter conjunction that he had a few months before his birth, that cycle lasts for 13 months. The longest cycle is Mars. It lasts 25 to 26 months. There's a Sun-Mars conjunction every 2 years and 1 to 2 months. The next longest cycle is for Venus. There's an inferior conjunction of Venus and the Sun every 19 months. The Moon is the fastest one. Every 29.5 days, you'll have your Sun-Moon phase angle recur in the heavens. Those of you that have solar fire know that you can calculate the Sun-Moon phase angle returns in that program. These are used by some astrologers as conception charts for women that are trying to start a family, because it is thought that on those days that ovulation occurs or near to ovulation. And some astrologers use these Sun-Moon phase angle return charts as conception charts or ovulation timing charts. Unfortunately, solar fire does not calculate the rest of the phase angles between the Sun and the other planets or the interplanetary ones. Mayor, if you could go down to that bottom and select the Janus program, which is showing the virtual PC. It's paused there. There you go. The program that I use to calculate these phase angle returns is the New Zealand astrology software for Windows. And you're thinking, how's he running this on an Apple laptop? Well, I've got virtual PC on there. And this is a program called Janus from New Zealand. And it'll calculate every combination of phase angle returns that you could want, even to the asteroids and the trans-Neptunians and the nodes and everything. So you can calculate the Sun, Moon, Sun, Mercury, Sun, Venus, and the Mercury, Neptune, and the Mercury, Jupiter, and the Venus, Saturn. Every possible combination of phase angle returns can be calculated in this Janus program. If you want to see how these are used in practice, some of you have heard that I was diagnosed with rectal cancer last November 2nd, and I underwent 28 radiation treatments in December and January, and I was taking tablet chemotherapy at the time of the radiation treatments. Saturn station last December at 2504 Leo, does everybody remember that? My natal Pluto was at 2459, so Saturn station on my Pluto within 5 minutes of arc, and just parked there for 3 months. I went in for a colonoscopy 4 or 5 days after I finished writing volume 5 and got diagnosed with rectal cancer. So it's pretty serious stuff. But the good news is when I have my Sun-Mars phase angle return, that only happens every 25 to 26 months, and it just happened on a Monday or Tuesday night on the 27th. I had gone in for a PET scan, and I was at an appointment the next day in Seattle while we're flying out of town to come here for the conference to meet with the surgeon, and they gave me a CD of the PET scan, and the guy pops it up on the screen in the surgeon's office. No spread to the liver. There were some lesions on my liver they were worried about, and Pluto stationed opposite my Jupiter at 24 Gemini last year for 6 months, so I was sweating this for the last 3 months, wondering about what kind of shape my liver was in. Nothing in the lymph glands, and nothing in the lungs. So I got a clean bill of health for the rest of the body, which is the best you could expect, and I go in for surgery on April 9th. But to show you how this works, this was the exact minute or second that the Sun and Mars returned to that 44 degrees of angular separation that they have in my chart. I've got the Sun at 22 Scorpio, I got Mars at 8 Libra, they're 44 degrees apart. Once every 25 to 26 months, in the heavens, the Sun-Mars repeat that distance arc. That's called a Sun-Mars holographic transit. You can also call it a Sun-Mars phase angle return or a Sun-Mars recurrence transit. On that day, and you've seen Carol with me in the trade show, she has 7 degrees Libra rising, so where am I in her chart? I'm her descendant, right? She got 7 Aries on the descendant. Where was the Sun on the day of my Sun-Mars phase angle return? It was in the degree of my partner's descendant. And the other things that you find in these charts is that I refer to the symbolism for the rising degree to help us understand what is the nature of the energy that's coming through for those next 2 years in the case of Sun and Mars. And so one of the techniques that I mentioned in the book is to refer to the rising degree of these holographic transits and study the degree symbols. And that shows you how you can align your free will with higher self in the way that you're going to apply your will towards the things that you want to try to accomplish over the next 2 years.
Are you relocating that or using it in your workplace?
I would treat these like solar returns where you calculate them for the place of residence. Whereas secondary progressions, I would always recommend keeping the natal position to calculate the progressed angles. But in holographic transits, I would treat them like lunar or solar returns where you cast them for the current place of residence. Mary, if we go back to that Acrobat file, please. There is something that I've included in the book about the recurrence of the degrees that the synodic cycle conjunctions occur in. And on the second page of your handout, you'll see a zodiac wheel with a bunch of little verbalizing numbers written in around the circumference of it. I calculated 5,000 years of Sun-Jupiter conjunctions last year. Now you wonder how I got cancer, right? I with my pencil. And I'm researching these Sun-Jupiter conjunctions, for example, for 5,000 years, and I wanted to see if there was a pattern where they would occur in the same degree of the zodiac on a regular basis. And what I found was that 76 synodic cycles of the Sun and Jupiter, which last 399 days each, about 13 months, they'll return to the exact same degree of the zodiac 83 years later to the day. So 76 synodic cycles of 399 days each equal 83 years to the day. What else happens on that day? 7 sidereal cycles of 11.86 years of Jupiter orbiting around the Sun also equal 83 years to the day. So this shows the relationship between the zodiac and the solar system. If you're going to go into fifth dimensional consciousness and work with holographic astrology and work with holographic transits, he says with Mercury and Uranus and Pisces on the North Node, if you want to not wait until the end of the Mayan calendar to shift to the fifth dimension, but you want to get a 5-year jump on it, go read the book and go there now, because what happens is when you go into the holographic dimensions of astrology, you're seeing the interrelationship between the solar system and the zodiac. And it is a beautiful dance. If you know what you're looking for, you can see the perfection of how the solar system and the zodiac are married together. If you look at this diagram closely, you'll notice that I numbered the conjunctions, 1, 2, 3, 4, so on. And you go all the way around the wheel, and you get to the 12th one, and then you start going around the wheel again. And these conjunctions fall in the same degree of the zodiac over and over again for thousands of years in this little same degree, and they repeat this cycle for hundreds and thousands of years. Occasionally, a conjunction will shift into an adjacent degree for what I call a rare conjunction, and then it'll come back and repeat the pattern again. Great philosophers, you have to think about Sun Jupiter. In Volume 5, I gave a case study of Immanuel Kant, who wrote The Critique of Pure Reason, which was published in 1781, the year that Uranus was discovered. He was born with one of these rare prenatal Sun-Jupiter conjunctions that hadn't happened since the 11th century BC and won't happen again until the 26th century. And if you read the degree symbol for that prenatal conjunction degree, it talks about writing the magnum opus, the great alchemical work on philosophy, and that was the soul group that he was born into. The last time that the Sun-Jupiter had formed in that degree was during a certain dynasty in China that was also followed by a rational empiricist dynasty and replaced the mystical thinking of the people before them. And if those of you are familiar with Kant's writing, where he critiqued the empiricists and the rationalists and saying that without moral law, humanity was going to have some kind of devolution, you can understand that he might have been reincarnated from the 11th century BC in China. What I'm doing with this work, and I know I just have a couple minutes left, is that I'm looking at the reincarnational cycles. And the 5 classical planets, they'll all form recurring conjunctions with the Sun on a repeating basis. The Sun-Mercury inferior conjunction will recur every 79 years after 249 synodic cycles, or after every 125 years after 394 cycles. Sounds like Mercury, right? It has a 2-stroke engine, just like one of those rickshaws in New Delhi that's spewing out all the smoke. It's got one of those 2-stroke motors. The Sun-Venus conjunctions, inferior conjunctions, will recur in the same degree of the zodiac every 251 years. The Sun-Mars conjunctions will occur in the same degree of the zodiac every 205 years. As I mentioned, Sun-Jupiter are conjunct in the same degree of the zodiac 83 years to the day, and that's also 7 sidereal cycles of Jupiter. And then Sun and Saturn, they'll form conjunctions in the same degree of the zodiac every 147 years. In the book, I'm describing this is how the soul reincarnates in its next lifetime. That the length of time between this birth and your next incarnation is governed by these recurring synodic cycle conjunctions. And you'll find a classical planet that is the ruler of the chart. If you have Cancer or Leo rising, don't worry. There's one of the 5 classical planets that will become your chart ruler. And if you want to see me in the trade show, I can tell you how to determine that. And that will determine the length of time between the present incarnation and the next one, and when you incarnated previously. You can go exactly along the historical timeline and know when the soul previously incarnated by measuring these synodic cycle conjunctions that are recurring throughout human history on a regular basis. So I know I'm running out of time now. I just want to say that I have a table over the trade show where I have Volume 5 available and to sign. And if any of you have any questions about the techniques, I can talk to you privately over the trade show. Thanks for attending the lecture this afternoon.